Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to this, the third and final lecture in the Chicago Education Speaker Series, sponsored jointly by the Spencer Foundation, Northwestern University, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and the University of Chicago. When I attended school back in the 1950s and 60s, no one held schools accountable for helping low-income kids develop high levels of cognitive skill. The famous sociologist Petram Sorokin wrote in 1959, "At the present moment, it is certain that the school, while being a training and educational institution, is at the same time a piece of social machinery which tests the abilities of students, which sifts them, selects them, and decides their prospective social position." In the 1960s, critics argued that this piece of social machinery was blocking opportunities for low-income students. Moreover, the industrial and clerical jobs for which schools prepared many low-income students were beginning to disappear, and too few students were ready to succeed in what we now call the knowledge economy. As an antidote, more recently, many states have now embraced the Common Core curriculum that mandates higher order thinking for all, and the popular slogan has been college for all. But how do we reckon that slogan, college for all, with the reality that our school system has not to date demonstrated the capacity to produce higher order thinking on a mass scale? How should this piece of social machinery be repaired, or should we replace it? And if so, what should we replace it with? That's the topic of tonight's discussion, and no one is better able to lead it than the experts that we have assembled here. Before turning to that discussion, though, I'd like to introduce the new president of the Spencer Foundation, Naila Suwad Nasir. The Spencer Foundation, located here in Chicago, is the only foundation we have that's dedicated to supporting research and education. Naila is herself a distinguished educational psychologist who studies race, culture, learning, and identity. We are thrilled that Naila has moved from Berkeley to lead Spencer, and delighted that one of her first priorities has been to stimulate this lecture series. Please welcome Naila Suwad Nasir.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to add my welcome on behalf of the Spencer Foundation. I'm pleased and honored to be here this afternoon at the third talk in our lecture series. All of the talks so far have been really thought-provoking and timely, and really grateful for Steve and his team for pulling together what promises to be a really important discussion this afternoon. Thinking about what it means to attend college and what kinds of trajectories to and through college are optimal, given shifts in both higher education and in the employment sector, is both a challenging and critical discussion to be having. Challenging, I think, because the issues of race and social class and opportunity structures are always at least just underneath the surface in discussions around college and school-to-work transition. And I know that Professor Rosenbaum and the distinguished panel will provide much food for thought this afternoon, and I am looking forward to it. I also want to encourage you, one of our goals with the speaker series is to build connections across the different university communities in Chicago. So when the talk ends, there's food and drink in the back. I encourage you to get to know somebody you don't already know from a university that is not your own. And with that, Lisa will introduce the panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Rosen. I'm the Executive Director of the U Chicago Science of Learning Center, and I will be serving as our moderator for this evening's discussion. Our work at the center focuses on using research to improve learning in a variety of settings, especially for disadvantaged students who have historically not been well served by their public schools. One of the ways we do this is through a research grant program called Successful Pathways from School to Work. If you are a University of Chicago student or faculty member doing research related to the improvement of public education, I would encourage you to see me after the lecture, during the reception, to talk to me about applying. I would really encourage you to apply for that opportunity. The deadline for applications is May 29th, so please come see me if you're interested. Before we get into the substance of the program, I'd like to say a few words about how we've organized the evening. First, we're going to hear from our keynote speaker, Jim Rosenbaum, who will talk for about 40 minutes. And this will be followed by some remarks from our discussants, and then I'll moderate a discussion among them for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up for audience Q&A. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, James Rosenbaum. Rosenbaum is Professor of Human Development and Social Policy and of Sociology at Northwestern University, as well as a faculty fellow at the Institute for Policy Research, where he chairs the program on poverty, race, and inequality. Rosenbaum's current major area of research concerns the College for All movement, college attendance, high school to work transitions, and linkages among students, schools, and employers. For 2 decades, he conducted an extensive research project on the effects of relocating poor African American families in public housing to subsidized housing in the white middle-class suburbs of Chicago. This quasi-natural experiment, known as the Gautreaux program, has enabled him to study the effects of these moves on children's educational outcomes and job opportunities, as well as the social and economic effects on the mothers. These studies encouraged the federal government to create its Moving to Opportunity program, which many of you know about. As specialist in research on work, education, and housing opportunities, he's published 6 books and many articles on these subjects. His ideas about community college reforms were implemented in the design of the new Gutman Community College in the CUNY system, and in the proposals of the reform group Complete College America. Rosenbaum has testified before congressional committees on several occasions and is an advisor to Completion by Design, a national demonstration program of community college reform, and to an evaluation of the Florida College and Career Readiness Initiative, which is implementing an idea he proposed in 2001. Please welcome Professor James Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Lisa. It is a great pleasure to be here. This talk, graduation speeches were invented out of the belief that college students should never be released into the world until they have been properly sedated. This is not a graduation speech, fortunately, and sedating is not my goal. But my goal is to inform you about a fast-changing college reality that is really hard for us to keep envisioning because it changes so quickly and the evidence is so hard to pull together. Research becomes essential to understand that, and I am pleased to be able to report to you a lot of things I've learned about that reality over the last 2 decades. And it is an impressive and I think inspiring story, but one that leaves a lot to be desired in terms of what the next steps are. In the next 40 minutes, and I'm going to stay at 40 minutes, we will address a series of issues. First, I want to show you that College for All is our new national policy, and it changes everything. Second, College for All has created impressive policy successes, truly astounding. But the successes are incomplete in very serious ways. Third, we educators who work in this domain often wear BA blinders, which prevent us from seeing alternatives that are really viable and desirable. Fourth, instead of blaming students, as we so often do, and trying to repair students with remedial, we can redesign colleges and college procedures to increase success. And finally, we must rethink college and the many ways colleges can reduce obstacles to success. Social research can be useful if it makes us question our preconceptions. Some time ago, supported by a grant from the Spencer Foundation, I studied a residential mobility program that helped low-income Black families move from housing projects to middle-class white suburbs. The degree of that social move cannot be overestimated. These families discovered radically new social environments that they had never known previously. Safe neighborhoods, academically motivated peers, and good schools. Moreover, freed from the anxiety in violent places, children often discovered abilities they didn't know they had. The findings challenge many of our preconceptions about what we consider housing project children, and it suggests that their ability is not an individual attribute built into them, but rather is constrained by the housing project context. When the children move out of that context into middle-class white suburbs, far from the housing projects, these radical changes in social environments can lead to new experiences and even discovering abilities they and no one else knew they had. While our usual preconceptions blame children for their low achievement, this study suggests that the causes may be in the environment, and we had best look there. Different social contexts may help youth discover new abilities. In today's talk, I want to describe a new social context that colleges have created, the ways that it works, and how research can help students discover new options and new procedures that can improve their performance, their abilities, and their success. Just as society blames youth in housing projects for lacking ability, we often blame students who drop out for their inability to stay in college. And I want to suggest some ways that college has some responsibility here and can be redesigned to change that dynamic. In recent years, the US has adopted an ambitious college for all policy, which has radically changed society. This policy has drastically increased college access. High schools can boast about their college attendance rates, and they should, but it isn't sufficient. Unfortunately, many of these college students drop out, failing to get any credential. Educators and policymakers have blamed student deficiencies for their failure. They have proposed remedial programs to repair some of these student deficiencies. But after decades of remedial research, we find that remedial rarely works. Instead of blaming students for being poorly prepared for college, I will report a study that suggests that students' college difficulties arise from our narrow conceptualization of the problem. Examining a new college environment, our research shows alternative options and procedures that may permit more students to benefit from college, many more, including many disadvantaged students. This broader view of college may greatly enhance students' abilities to succeed. As everybody knows, the labor market's skill demands have dramatically increased, and college has become a necessity. While global competition and automation have decimated the number and pay of unskilled jobs, half the jobs in the US are mid-skilled jobs. Many are well-paid and in high demand. While many unskilled workers are unemployed, many skilled jobs go unfilled because applicants lack the requisite skills. Many of these jobs cannot be sent offshore, and they're often vital to society. College for All is our main response to meeting the skill demands of these jobs, and we need to think about how to make that work. College for All is also society's approach to improving opportunity for youth. Many people see education as the ticket to upward mobility. Some even see education as a silver bullet that will alleviate poverty. But the problem is much larger. Fully half the nation's youth, not just those in poverty, struggle to get decent jobs and become productive adults. Economic inequality has steadily increased since 1970, and it has accelerated in recent years. It is widely recognized as depending on educational attainment. Moreover, half of our nation's youth are prevented from attaining responsible roles, positive career prospects, and ultimately a respected place in the adult world. In a recent book, Coming Up Short, a Harvard researcher shows clearly what is at stake. Jennifer Silva studied young working class adults and showed how they're trapped in depressing lives with no escape. They are resourceful, they try innovations, they try things that should work, and they are shot down at every turn. Silva vividly describes young adults trying to make ends meet, but they only have part-time, unskilled jobs and poor pay. For many, their only safety net is a credit card at 21% interest rates, and the only escape from that, bankruptcy, has a 7-year stigma, which frightens these youth. College loans are lower interest rates, of course, but their escape is 20 years. Some attend community college, but she tells the stories, and even there, they're losers because they fail at BA transfer courses. They chase BA dreams, and they get nothing. Silva richly describes the desperation of working class lives, even if they enroll in college. But as we have discovered, college does offer an important escape route out of poverty, but most students don't see it. Indeed, Silva did not see it either. I'm doing something presumptuous here. I'm talking to a room full of well-educated people, educators indeed, who know the way that higher education works, and I'm going to tell you, you got to rethink that. Every one of you has an image of college based on your own experience, and I want you to question that mental image. It is partly wrong and partly outdated. The college world has radically changed in the past 20 years. There is some good news here. We find many more good options besides the usual ones. Policymakers often focus on one-dimensional attributes, BA degrees, academic skills, and high earnings. Our findings suggest that this one-dimensional view is too narrow. First, besides BA degrees, we find that associate degrees and occupational certificates, which we will call non-BA credentials, have higher earnings than high school graduates. Second, contrary to popular assumptions, we find that students don't need to have high academic skills to benefit from college. Third, besides earning outcomes, we find young working adults also value non-monetary job rewards, and certificate and associate degrees offer many of the same non-monetary job rewards that BAs offer. And finally, we show that colleges can use non-traditional procedures which can reduce obstacles and support student success. Policymakers limit opportunities if they focus only on one-dimensional attributes and only on traditional procedures. The data from our study comes from the Educational Longitudinal Survey, from the National Center of Educational Statistics. It is an impressive data set. It follows a cohort of students from their 10th grade experience in 2002 to 10 years later in 2012, when they're many years out of high school. It is a remarkable data set, and it is, that's remarkable too. And there's a lot of reasons why we should pay attention to these data. These data give us a viewpoint we cannot see any other way. Turning to the next slide, and only one. We find that College for All is already here. It's already a success. U.S. society strives to give all students the opportunity to attend college. And amazingly, and this is truly amazing, it has largely already succeeded. In the graduating class of 2004, 90% of students enrolled in college within 8 years. 90%, think about that. Think about your high school class and think about 90% of those people. All of these people go to college. Now, the official statistics are less than that. They're 67%. That's looking at who's in college the year after high school. That's not good enough because people keep coming. After a year or 2 or 3 or 8, we find people are still entering college. If we include all 8 years after high school, it's 90%. Indeed, even for those with low test scores and low SES backgrounds, the proportion is still over 70%. The rates of college enrollment are similar. Listen to this. We don't hear this very often. Similar for whites, blacks, and Hispanics. If they high school graduate, they're just as likely to go to college, whatever their race is. Something remarkable is happening here. Given a labor market that increasingly demands college credential, the college for all ideal may be appropriate and it may be a powerful draw. But when we talk about college, you and I think about something a little more than that. We think about the BA degree. That's the one we know. That's the one you have. That's the one I have. Public service ads proclaim a $1 million payoff if you get a BA. And students have gotten the message, although I'm not sure they understand a lifetime payoff. By 2002, 84% of high school sophomores expect to get a BA degree or higher. Unlike prior generations, low grades and low academic tracks don't even reduce those plans very much. When we say college for all, we usually mean BA for all. Indeed, academic researchers make this mistake also. Look at your journals. In many journal articles by people who are experts in education, college plans is the same as BA plans. There's nothing in between. We wear what I call BA blinders, and by limiting our perceptions, those blinders have serious implications. Despite the desirability of BA degrees for many students, BA plans may have serious disadvantages for some students, which they often don't realize until they're well into their college years. For example, to ask a dumb question, how long does it take to get a 4-year BA? 5 years on average. If you started a community college, the answer is 6 years. Students who make plans to get a 4-year BA and they think that means 4 years are underestimating by a good margin, and they're likely to be disappointed in many ways. Community colleges, we're on the right slide. Community colleges offer impressive opportunities. Community colleges indeed may be a powerful tool for providing opportunity for disadvantaged students. Community colleges enroll more low SES and academically weak students than 4-year colleges. About 37% of all college students in this sample went to community colleges, but of low-income students in the sample, of low-achieving students in the sample, 61% go to community colleges. Similarly, 51% of low SES students enroll in 2-year colleges, over twice the rate of high SES students. Community colleges have many attractions for non-traditional students. They are low cost, they are closer to home, they have lower academic requirements, and they have flexible hours, almost 24/7. I'm not exaggerating. Can you imagine classes, college classes, starting at midnight and running for 2 hours, and possibly then with continuing classes starting at 2 a.m.? This is happening in Boston now. It is happening in Seattle. It is happening in many places. Community colleges award non-BA credentials in vital fields that you and I depend on: well-trained X-ray technicians, computer network technicians, airplane mechanics, machinists, elevator repair technicians, and healthcare workers of all kinds. National data indicate that although BA attainment has increased significantly in the past 20 years, non-BA attainment has increased even more, 78% increase in the early decade of this century. Although we urge most students to seek BAs, few students get them if they enter community colleges. In L's of community college entrance, about 20% of people got BA degrees in the 8 years after high school. Despite the fact that 80% of all students have BA plans, BA attainments are very rare, even 8 years later, and students are rarely warned. However, an additional 33% get non-BA credentials. For students in the lower third of SES, the discrepancy increases. Only 14% get BA degrees, but 37% get non-BA credentials. Including non-BA credentials as an indicator of success more than doubles the number who get college credentials. Oh, let's see. But do these credentials have payoffs? First, many people with non-BAs get better averages than we usually consider. Everybody knows that the average payoff for a BA is higher than for the associate degree and for the certificate. But few people notice the overlaps, and there are big earnings overlaps. Most associate degree graduates earn higher salaries than the lowest quartile of BA graduates. And similarly, at the other end of the distribution, the top 25% of associate degree earners earn more than most BA graduates. This is true for men and for women. Many non-BAs are getting pretty good earnings, comparable to many BAs. In Nels, in 1999, the earlier cohort, non-BAs had no earning payoffs, and our analyses update those findings with this more recent cohort, and we find that compared with high school graduates, certificate holders and associate degree graduates have higher odds of being employed and higher earnings than high school graduates. But we have to ask about another category, the one that's the largest category, those who get no credential. What happens to those students? In interviews, some students told us they didn't think they were going to stick it out for the whole credential, but they thought some college would do them so good, and they would do that. Our findings indicate that that strategy is not likely to work. Students who attend college but get no credential, what we've called some college group, get no better employment rates and no earnings payoff. In other words, this last bar, it's really hard for you to tell it, but it is not significant. There is no payoff, either in terms of employment or earnings for some college. Okay, earnings is a convenient metric for measuring success, and researchers often stress that one as if it's the only indication of labor market success. But we're all aware that it's not. High pay doesn't necessarily indicate good jobs, and many aspects of jobs make them good, even if they're not high paid. So we want to look at other attributes. Using a different national survey, the Ad Health Survey, which has particularly good indicators of job conditions, we examined young adult workers' job satisfaction and whether it was related to earnings and whether it was related to other job attributes. And what we find is in the bottom bar here, that yes, job satisfaction is related to earnings. Higher earnings leads to more satisfaction. But all of these other indicators have stronger relationships with job satisfaction. In particular, career prospects, autonomy, variety. These are also significantly correlated and indeed more strongly correlated. These are important attributes. So now we're in a position to ask, do the non-BA credentials lead to or associated with better non-monetary job rewards? And in case you can't read this whole table quickly, I first will put in a plug for buying my book, because you'll find it there, Beyond Bridging the Gaps. But in the meantime, you'll have to take my word for it. Students who get associate degrees, and even those who get one-year certificates, get significantly more non-monetary job rewards than high school graduates. That's true for autonomy, variety, career preparation, jobs which lead to careers. These attributes are increased, are associated with these non-BA credentials. In addition, individuals with associate degrees, but not certificates, report lower rates of unpleasant job demands, jobs that are physically strenuous, repetitive, night shift, or irregular hours. In other words, besides the earning payoffs, certificates and associate degrees get other payoffs. They often lead to jobs with more non-monetary job rewards than high school graduates. Okay, although BA credentials offer good earnings, employment, and non-monetary job benefits, do they pose the same obstacles as BA degrees? BA degrees are famous for posing any number of obstacles, particularly to low-income students and low SES, and students with low test scores get less BA completion. In this data, guess what? We find the same thing. BAs are strongly correlated with SES and test scores. We would be surprised if they were not. But we were also surprised that non-BAs are not correlated with these. People who have low SES or low test scores do not have lower attainment at associate degrees or at certificates. What then about earnings? We looked at earnings within credentials. Here we're replicating our prior findings, but looking inside credentials, and we ask whether SES and test scores predict employment or earnings among students at the same credential level. And again, we find low SES and low test scores strongly, significantly predict lower earnings among BAs. They do not predict lower earnings among associate degree earners or certificate earners. The usual expected barriers that we usually see do not occur at these credentials. Currently, students are being told that they need college-level academic skills to benefit from college. It's a discouraging message, and many students react negatively to it. These findings raise questions about whether that's true. Finally, there are dropouts. We often assume that students who drop out of college are lacking the capability to complete a credential. That isn't true. When we examine who these some college students are, we find that these students have higher achievement or similar achievement to the non-BA categories in a number of things, on high school GPA, on study habits, on test scores. They are very much the same. In other words, we see no reason why the people who drop out, the largest group, 46% at community colleges, we see no reason why they couldn't have gotten a certificate or couldn't have gotten an associate degree, except perhaps the BA blinders I was talking about. They don't know about these credentials, and they don't know about their value. For practitioners who must act now, our main finding is that we should be helping students avoid this category of some college with no credential, which amounts to college dropout. These students invest time and tuition, and they have high hopes, but they get no credentials, no earnings payoff, and perhaps substantial debts. Yet much evidence points to credential completion is attainable by these students. Most importantly, there's evidence to suggest that they can combine credentials. And indeed, getting a certificate first would be an easy strategy to get a high odds credential and then go on for a BA, as many students do. I want to now radically change gears and consider another way that I want to question our traditional assumptions. We usually blame students for their failures, and we try to fix these students with remedial programs that never work, or rarely work. Instead, we should ask whether college procedures themselves could be redesigned to reduce barriers to completion. Colleges were designed to serve a different kind of student, a traditional student, and they use traditional procedures that we assume are intrinsic to college and can't be changed. These procedures let students make their own course choices, which is gratifying but risky and often depends on getting information from college-educated parents and extra funds if college exploring runs over time. We find that non-traditional students often have difficulty with these procedures. Is there any other alternative? We studied a variety of colleges and we discovered many non-traditional procedures designed to reduce students' problems and that may better fit low-income students. I will enumerate them very quickly, and I can answer more questions about them if you wish. First, pathways procedures. Some colleges create highly structured programs that specify which courses students should take each term. This prevents wrong choices, wasted time, and many worries. Colleges can also anticipate the demand for each class, so classes don't get canceled for low enrollment, as happens often in community colleges. Second, preset course schedules. In each major, classes are offered in the same time slot every term, so students don't have to rearrange their work and their family obligations each time a new term starts. Instead of a patchwork of course schedules at different times, night and day, courses are offered in predictable time slots, often back-to-back, to reduce commuting time. 3, mandatory advising and continual monitoring. Rather than waiting for students to figure out that they have a problem and go ask the counselor, counselors call students in regular intervals and they monitor students' progress on a regular basis. 4th, peer cohorts provide social supports and information as the whole group of students go through the same group of courses during each term. 5, remedial testing procedures. Remedial testing has been studied for decades, and with really dismal results. Remedial testing has not been studied, particularly the procedures that are used for testing students. We observed how community colleges test students, and we discovered many problems that students experience. Students often don't know that they should prepare for these courses. They don't know that their preparation material is available, and sometimes it's not. They don't know to take pre-tests, and they don't know that retest options are available. Students sometimes don't even know they are being tested, and they don't know why they're answering these meaningless questions, even though these test scores are going to add months or years to their college lives and their tuition bills. 6, combining degrees. Instead of choosing a single goal, students' plans can combine degrees. Students can choose what we've called an incremental success strategy, getting a quick 1-year occupational certificate and then going on to higher degrees. The certificate provides fewer obstacles, it provides immediate payoffs, and a quick win can increase students' confidence and also increase their income as they go on in college. Although community colleges rarely mention this option, 25% of certificate holders go on for a higher degree. And we can't help thinking that that number might be higher if somebody actually mentioned this to students. Alternatively, students can plan backup options if their original plan doesn't go well, but that has to be planned. And if students don't know it, they're not likely to figure it out in the days when they're about to drop out. We discovered degree ladders, which synchronize degree requirements so that courses required for certificates also count toward their associate degree. Sorry. Some of these ideas were used in City University of New York's ASAP program. Launched in 2007, it was done in a random assignment study. ASAP was shown to have doubled graduation rates, decreased dropout rates, and increased credits earned. In my new book, I describe 2 other community colleges that use the ideas from that earlier book. Harper College here in Illinois has done a remarkable job of aligning academic standards with feeder high schools and the Harper courses. Instead of aiming for some abstract standard, they aim for the standards that are actually going to be expected when they get into college. And the coordination of those standards has dramatically improved student achievement when they get to college. Harper has also created linkages that similar to those we described, both with 4-year colleges, which often don't recognize some of the credits students get in community college, and with employers. Gutman College did many of the kinds of reforms we talked about. I want to highlight one of them in particular because I think it's so innovative and it really relates to a critique that we've been making about community colleges. Gutman College created a second chance term. It gives students an added 6 weeks added on to the prior 12-week term if students did not succeed. In other words, if students don't succeed in the first term, they immediately can go on to take the same course and fix the things they didn't learn in the next 6 weeks. In this kind of system, failure is temporary, and it may only last for 6 weeks. As these procedures indicate, we need to rethink higher education. When we wear BA blinders, we make many mistaken and frankly privileged assumptions that disparage good credentials and jobs. We assume college degree equals BA. We assume the BA is always better earnings and better job rewards than other credentials. We assume the BA is a 4-year degree. We assume that degree success and higher earnings always require high test scores, but they don't for non-BAs. We assume non-BA is an inferior dead end, but it's not always inferior, and it's not always a dead end. We assume college poses inevitable obstacles, but new procedures can reduce these obstacles. Non-BA credentials are not just for disadvantaged youth. Upper middle class students sometimes enjoy art, solving technical problems, fixing devices, helping people with their computers, caring for the sick, or running a restaurant or small business. Should society make youth ashamed of those plans and of those careers? These jobs often have good pay, non-monetary rewards, and they make important contributions to society. Stigmatizing these jobs does not well serve students, and it may contribute to the skills gap in society. Students can consider many more options that reduce obstacles and improve success and payoffs. I am not urging low goals. I am urging students to consider incremental steps that give quick wins and later options, especially for students at high odds of getting nothing, as so many students do. Like the improved achievement from residential mobility, new college procedures can help help youth discover abilities they didn't know they had. Researchers always say more research is needed, and that's true here. Research indeed is the only way we can understand this new fast-changing college realities which we face. Policy can't keep up without research. The bottom line, colleges offer many more options than many people realize today. While reformers urge BA dreams for all, the most common outcomes of community colleges are no credentials and no payoffs, often with big debts. I am calling for a radical shift in our point of view as researchers. Despite good intentions, researchers often wear BA blinders. We have shown that many good options exist. Research needs to consider how these alternatives work for different individuals. Research also needs to consider how various high schools inform students about these alternatives, how students respond, and how procedures can be redesigned to work better. Students need to see dependable pathways, and high schools can have a major impact. Amazingly, we have managed to get nearly all high school graduates to attend college. Now we must go the next step to make sure they succeed and get payoffs. These issues are crucial. Our society's future depends on them. Thank you. I forgot to mention on the title slide, my colleagues were Caitlin Ahern, Janet Rosenbaum, and Alexis Gable, and they've made important contributions to this talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Jim, for that very thoughtful and very thought-provoking presentation. For the next part of the program, we've invited a diverse group of colleagues to comment on Jim Rosenbaum's presentation in the hopes of stimulating a lively discussion about the vital questions and issues that he's raised. Each of our three speakers approaches the question of preparing students for life after high school from very different perspectives. I'm going to introduce them all at once, and then I'm going to invite all of them to join me on the stage and then offer their comments one by one. Our first discussant, Nicole Holland, is Professor of Educational Inquiry and Curriculum Studies, as well as of African and African American Studies at Northeastern Illinois University. Her current research explores the individual and institutional factors that affect urban public high school students' preparation for and enrollment in four-year colleges and universities. Our second discussant, Alan Mather, is the Chief Officer for College and Career Success at the Chicago Public Schools. During his 30 years in CPS, Alan has served as a high school English teacher at 3 neighborhood high schools, as the founding assistant principal at Northside College Prep, and as founding principal of Lindblom Math and Science Academy. He's going to tell us how CPS is responding to some of the challenges Jim Rosenbaum has identified. Finally, we will hear from Charles Payne, who was a faculty member here until very recently and is now the Henry Rutgers Distinguished Professor of African American Studies at Rutgers University and director of the Joseph Cornwall Center for Metropolitan Research. Charles is the author of multiple books, including So Much Reform, So Little Change, which examines the persistence of failure in urban schools, and a co-edited anthology, Teach Freedom, the African American Tradition of Education for Liberation. One of his current book projects is an attempt to synthesize what we should have learned about improving the schooling and life outcomes of children from disenfranchised communities. Please join me in welcoming our three discussants.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. There we go. So my name is Nicole Holland, and I am a faculty member at Northeastern Illinois University in the Educational Inquiry and Curriculum Studies program. I often find it's useful to share what I call relevant positionality when people have these type of discussions. So I want to share a few things about myself before I offer some comments. The first thing is I'm an African American woman from Brooklyn, New York. I attended a very small liberal arts college in Clinton, New York called Hamilton College. I believe that my experiences at Hamilton actually shaped who I am as a person and also influenced the work that I currently do. I think that's an important piece to add, and I think understanding people's positionality makes a big difference. So I want to introduce just a couple of items for us to think about as we're having these discussions. The first I want to introduce is this notion of for whom is a college, four-year college degree an option. And during my comments, as I say college, I will be referring to a four-year college or university. So for whom is the four-year college an option? The second thing I want us to think about as we're having these discussions is what I call the determination criteria. So who's making these decisions with students and their families? When are those determinations made? And then what criteria are actually used as we are making these decisions? The next piece I want to talk about a little bit is, are we really paying close enough attention to college readiness? It might be the case that children aren't doing well in college because we're not preparing them to do well in college. So I want to have that conversation a little bit. And then if I have a few moments towards the end, I want to talk about college for all beyond monetary issues. So first, I want to put this chart up here, and it's just one of those that shows, it's the April 2018 Bureau of Labor Statistics data, literally from this month or this past month, and it shows what we've been talking about, right? The more educational attainment one has, the more one is going to earn. I don't think anybody has any kind of problem with that. However, I also want to share this. Now, these statistics are actually from 2014, a little bit older. And it's the same data. It's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's the median weekly earnings of people 25 years and older. And if you notice, within each of those demographic categories, the trend remains the same, right? The more you learn, the more you earn. No problem with that. I arbitrarily said, you know, when do you crack the $1,000 mark? Arbitrarily. And what I found was, for whites, Asians, and males, they crack that barrier at the bachelor's degree. For women and Latinos, that barrier is cracked just slightly when they get more than a bachelor's degree. And then for African Americans to reach parity with Asians who have a bachelor's degree, they must have an advanced degree. So this notion of kind of steering folks and saying, yeah, there are different options for you, they have different consequences. And I think we need to be mindful about that when we're having these discussions with students and their families. I want to move quickly on to the notion of the determination criteria. Again, beyond students and their families, who is having these conversations with students? And I will say to you that for many students who might be first-generation students, who might not have members of their families and in their communities have a long and dense college-going history, they rely heavily on school personnel. Well, the problem with that is that sometimes school personnel don't know students well enough. They know them on paper, but they don't know them as people to help them make these choices. And so I was recently reading something from NACAC, which is the National Association of College Admissions Counseling, and they suggested that a counselor's caseload is 482 students on average. 482 students. How do you meaningfully counsel somebody when you are siphoning through 482 students? So I think that is a concern for us to just put into this conversation if we're asking schools to help make these decisions for students or help them and their families make decisions. The other thing I want to talk about is when these decisions are made. Are we talking 4th grade? Are we talking 7th grade? Are we talking 10th grade? I think the timing really plays a role. Are we structuring people at 4th grade and saying, you don't look like you're really college ready, I'm going to structure your opportunities? That feels reminiscent of tracking to me, and not in a good way, right? That's not a good thing, right? I just want to be clear, that's my position on that. So that seems problematic to me. But I also think it's problematic that we wait until students are in the 10th grade to say, do you want to go to college? Because education is a cumulative experience, right? And you have to have a foundation, you have to build, you have to be taking classes. These things have to become habitual to you. And so if we wait too late, that's a problem too. So I think we have to think about the timing of when we start telling students they are or they're not college material. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about what criteria are used. Many of us in this room know that we often turn to test scores. And there are many concerns around test scores. Some people aren't good test takers. Some people are attending institutions that don't prepare them to think clearly enough to make really good judgment on tests in a really comprehensive ways, but to take tests, which is another whole issue. But the most important thing that we should walk away from is the fact that test scores aren't always indicative of what a student can and cannot do once they enter a four-year college and university. So I think we have to be a little bit more thoughtful about what we're using as criteria to make these choices. This is just my definition of college readiness. I want to switch this conversation a little bit to not necessarily just looking at, is a student college ready? Because I think that is important. An individual must be ready to go on to college. But I also want to talk about the institutions and the level of preparation that we give our students to go on to college, which might be a reason why they're not ready to go to four-year colleges and universities. So I think that students should be able to enter college-bearing courses, right, without taking remedial and developmental courses. I think that's part of the problem. And we know that that is a big issue. Education Trust put out a report a couple of years ago, and they found that maybe one of the reasons students aren't college ready is because only 8%, this is data from 2013, but only 8% are taking a full college and career curriculum. So only 8% of the students in that class were taking a full college and career curriculum. On top of that, 3 in 10 high school students were taking a college prep curriculum, all right? That only adds up to about 40-some odd, % of the students who are taking this type of curriculum. So there's a large number of students who are missing this college prep curriculum. More shocking to me was that once those students who actually did take any type of college prep got into a four-year college or university, they didn't demonstrate mastery. So in other words, they weren't earning a 2.5 GPA in those core issues, in those core subjects. So that still gives me some concern about what happens once students then enter in and how we are preparing students to go on. I will say that I think that times have changed quite a bit, and we have to change not only what we're doing, but we have to meet the needs of our students. We have to figure out what our students need, and that's what we should be teaching in our high school courses, so they are able to then enter into four-year colleges and universities. So I want to talk a little bit about this data. This statistic was interesting to me because it showed that across socioeconomic backgrounds, almost all of them, and all post-secondary choices, kids are entering their next step of life taking some type of remedial course. And actually, on average, they're taking 2. And this is across all types of post-secondary choices. So no one is really being prepared well. A lot of people like to draw my attention to that little section on the end there, and they'll say, well, look, if you go to those private schools, the nonprofit and the for-profit, only 11% of the students there are actually taking remedial courses. Well, to that, I will say to them, that may be true, but those schools actually cost anywhere from 3 to 10 to 11% more than the public 2- and 4-year colleges. So I'm running out of time. I want to say something really quick about monetary issues. When we talk about the college for all issues, it's always around money. It seems that we all kind of circle around money. When Bernie Sanders proposed the College for All Act, it was about eliminating undergraduate tuition. It was about modifying student loan reform. It was about simplifying the student aid process, all important things. Today, we've had this conversation about employment, opportunities, and earnings. And even when we don't talk about money per se, we talk about the good stuff that happens when you have a good job, right? That's related to that. I think these things are very important, but I will also say this. I think four-year colleges and universities offer different types of experiences than some of those other options that were presented earlier. I think they offer students a chance to explore a range of academic disciplines. I think they also allow students to experience in a safe space some learning opportunities and activities that might interest them and then lead into careers. And then I also think that you meet a diverse group of students with varied academic and social interests when you go to the four-year colleges and universities. So I will stop there. Thank you for your time and attention.
All right, let's find the next deck. I'm looking for the deck. Let's see if I can find. There we go. Score. Hi. Where are you? In this context of College for All, I will also be referring to BA degrees when we show statistics here. I want to say that so much of what happens now in the Chicago public schools happened because of the research that came out of the consortium. Early on, Arnie Duncan opening our books to say, consortium, take our data, look at the good, the bad, and the ugly, and help us figure out what to fix, was super important. I will never say, you will never hear me say that we are data-driven. We are mission-driven and data-informed. And it is this information that I think drives so much of what we do. Because of that research, we see we had a focus on freshmen on track, right? So ensuring, knowing that students who fail no more than one semester of a core class in the freshman year of high school have basically 4 times greater chance of graduating from high school. And we see as we've improved freshmen on track, we have also improved our graduation rate. And while our college enrollment rate has remained flat at 59%, pretty much, for a number of years, because we have had a higher percentage of students graduating, that means we have had more going on to college. And college has been our North Star. You'll see Kenwood High School here was the first high school to have as its mission statement, college, period. But while we focused on college, we got some data that there are some other problems too. Opportunity youth are 16 to 24-year-olds who are out of work and out of school. In Chicago, we're fighting it out with Philadelphia for the greatest percentage of opportunity youth who have a high school diploma or above and are out of work and out of school. This research from Urban Labs and Thrive has been also really important to helping inform what we do. And part of what that has helped us think of is, what do we do for all students? Again, college has been our North Star, but we recently came out with a graduation requirement called Learn, Plan, Succeed. Learn, Plan, Succeed, I should back up, about our school quality rating policy. We call it the SQUIRP, affectionately. In that, we measure those things that are important to us. And unlike a lot of large districts, we don't focus, I think, too much on standardized test scores. We do look at attendance, we look at college enrollment, we look at college persistence. But you know, we have the largest military-type schools in the country here. We have a military academy for every branch of the armed forces, and when students go on to the military, if that's their choice, we ding those schools for that. We have schools here that are focused specifically on career technical education. Students have to major in a CTE field, which could be anything from barbering, cosmetology, carpentry, to pre-engineering or computer science. When those students go directly into work, we ding those schools for that because they students didn't go to college. So we came up with Learn, Plan, Succeed, a way to honor different ways. So yes, there is a graduation requirement where students have to have a concrete post-secondary plan in order to graduate, which could be college enrollment, and what we mean with an admissions letter and an award letter saying that college is affordable. Acceptance into a trades program. Over at Dunbar High School, we have a citywide trades program, Chicago Builds. We work with some of the trade unions here that will take students and move them directly into pre-apprenticeships. You know, good paying jobs directly out of high school. Gap year programs. We're working with a Bay Area nonprofit that provides gap year programs to low-income students. And yes, it may be that there are direct offer letters. At the same time, we've had to build in protections for vulnerable populations, our undocumented students, students who are justice involved or incarcerated, ensuring that we do not put a barrier up to graduation, but support students so when they leave school, there's somewhere that they can go. But you know, that takes training. You can't just say to a school counselor or a post-secondary advisor or a coach, hey, help them find a job out there. You may be surprised to know that there are only 2 courses. We have 10 four-year institutions around here that offer some sort of counselor training in the Chicagoland area, and 2 courses, period, that help counselors counsel students for what to do after high school. Most of the training they get is social emotional, it's behavioral. It is not about how are you helping students think about what's next. So we partnered with the Goddard Institute in New York a few years back and created this credential, the Chicago College and Career Advising Credential, CAC, affectionately known. And what we do is we put counselors, high school counselors, through 8 full days of training, 1 full day a month, around different aspects of the college-going process to ensure that they know how to prepare students for what's next. And we've revised this a great deal because of Learn, Plan, Succeed. Because similarly, just as counselors did not necessarily know how to help students prepare for college, what a match and fit college is, the right sort of place to go, they also did not know how to help for these other pathways. So we're working with the Workforce Funders Alliance. We're working with those gap year programs to say what sort of training do we need to put in for our school counselors. We also just hired college and career specialists for every one of our 13 geographic networks so they can support schools. And starting July 1st, we will have 10 coaches in our highest need schools to support students as they work on post-secondary plans. And I think most interesting and perhaps most unique is our partnership with the City Colleges of Chicago. CCC just placed 7 navigators in geographic areas, and we've focused them on 18 schools, specifically where students have not had concrete post-secondary plans or have a large number of students who enroll in City Colleges of Chicago, to work with the post-secondary leadership teams in those schools, and yes, every high school has a post-secondary leadership team, to be directed on how to support students. We don't want them taking the role of the school counselor. Our ratio is about 350 to 1. It's not great, but the ASCA ideal number is 250 to 1. And American School Counseling Association. Sorry, education and acronyms. But this is how we hope we are preparing students for what is next. Still in that higher ed frame, though, we have reconvened. We had for a while with our budget debacle in our state. We lost for a while, and we are reconnecting with our higher education compact. 22 colleges and universities to specifically support Chicago public school graduates as they enroll in those colleges. Nicole kind of referenced this before, but I can't tell you the number of schools, number of universities who we talked to and said, what are you doing to support Chicago public school students? What are you doing to support students of color? And the answer is, well, we have a diversity office. Just go there. And there are some really insulting things that people have said too that I'm not going to mention, but it has really been eye-opening. And it's also been really wonderful that so many of the colleges have said, yes, we will work with you, we will create SMART goals to help figure out how to support students, the Chicago public school students who come to us. And we worry about the same thing. We worry about tracking. We know that for years tracking had gone on. We've heard stories of school counselors who have said to young people who have gone on to do great things, you're not college ready. But how many did they dissuade? Probably quite a few. That's one of the reasons for the training we have. But on the other piece, we can put all the processes in place that we want. We can think about how to structure this program to move students this way, how to really prepare students for college this way. If we don't deal with students, the impacts of trauma on students, it doesn't matter the program we're going to put in place. We need to meet students where they are with these difficulties. The number of students that we have had who have scored high on that ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences scale, is frightening. So on average, 50 students who were screened for trauma had experienced 11 traumatic events out of 17 on the scale. And not surprisingly, students who score high on that scale also have many health problems and discipline problems. And I mean physical health, but also emotional health. So this is a place where we have to focus our energies. It's going to take funding, as most things do that matter, but it's where we need to go next. Thank you.
And I'm not using slides. No.
I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, Afternoon, everyone. I enjoyed the original paper and the responses to it. By way of saying something about my own positionality, I'm going to use that word from now on. Yeah, just the way I come at this larger discussion is that I think that our position as an older generation is to get as many young people as humanly possible to the brink of adulthood with choices that matter to them, right? Choices among things that they want to do, but also with the capacity to critique the choices that are available to them, right? And it's very important to put that latter phrase into this conversation because the latter phrase moves us away from a purely individualistic, technocratic, education gets you a job kind of conception. But also because when we begin to talk about what it means for students to have the capacity to critique the choices, it means they must be able to think from multiple viewpoints, right? And if I understand the process of what it means to prepare people to participate for real in democracy, that is one of the prerequisites, right? The ability to take multiple viewpoints seriously. And I think in everything that we do these days, I will be specific about the historical moment, we need to elevate the issue of preparing young people and ourselves for genuinely democratic participation. So just a few quick points of agreement or disagreement. Clearly, the Rosenbaum paper, I think Jim and I have known each other maybe 40 years, so it feels funny to be addressing him formally like this. Professor Rosenbaum's paper does important work in calling attention to changes in data that have gone unnoticed. There were actually some things I thought he had made errors in, and I checked, and he was right, all right? It does important work broadly in calling attention to the need for us to think more creatively about multiple pathways to adulthood. I don't think there's any real disagreement with this. I think the panelists in particular feel very strongly, all of us, right, that it is hard to overestimate the power of under-expectations in this discussion and in the lives of vulnerable children, and that we should assume that in the absence of deliberate countermeasures, calls for diverse pathways will be hijacked into policies of invidious and racialized tracking, as, again, my colleagues have already said. And as a matter of fact, given the pathway-breaking work on college match that has been done here, it would be interesting to put that discussion next to this discussion, right? So that we would be thinking simultaneously about some information about the extent to which students who could qualify for more rigorous educations are still being channeled into community colleges. And I don't mean to imply there's something wrong with community colleges. I'll come back to that. I know that language suggests that. I have said for a long time that Tony Bright creates the absolute worst acronyms in America. Don't laugh. I now give that title to you. Let's see, but Mr. Mather did make a point that's important to me. At the same time, we have had a discussion about expanded college access, the language I prefer. We have also had what seems to me a quite robust discussion in many parts of the country and many cities, including Chicago, about expanding non-BA related careers, IB careers program, expansion and upgrading of career and technical education that Mr. Mather referred. So these two, it's not one discussion or the other discussion. These discussions, it seems to me, have been going on. I want to say, again, partly because we're here at the University of Chicago where the consortium has made such a difference, that it's important to think about the history of how enhanced college access, where that conversation came from. I know that would be a complicated discussion, but in part, it seems to me that it develops as a response to that long 30, 40-year period of essentially laissez-faire education in our cities, right? Schools were doing pretty much what they wanted to do, right? And that was this is the period in which schools, I think many of you would say, were virtually defined by low expectations of everybody for everybody. Right? In that context, different actors bought into the idea of increased college access for different reasons, not all of them good. But what I do want to emphasize is the role that research played in that process. And I have to say, I see Melissa Roderick back there, and my understanding of these issues comes largely through Melissa and that whole Melissa and the principals thing that was going on there at one time in the city. It was a generative conversation. But the point I wanted to make about research, and I am saying this because there are so many graduate students in the audience, and I know that so many of you are always worrying about whether researchers can make a difference. Well, there are many examples of that in this larger discussion. But this is one of them. In particular, I think research challenged, the research on what it took to get kids to and through college, challenged people's preconceptions about what certain kinds of kids were capable of doing. One, it was a direct counter to low expectations. But two, the other thing that was important about this process is that the research broke this huge, humongous, tough, daunting challenge, can we get kids into college, into these real tiny, manageable bites, right? Can you reduce the number of kids who get F in freshman year? Just do that one thing. One thing, right? Can you increase the number of kids who get a FAFSA in on time? Do that one thing, right? By working in a climate in which people were predisposed to not believe the end goal was possible, giving them incremental goals that they could reach, which would lead up to something large, that was very important, I think, in making this idea go. But the point I wanted to make and just stress is that a part of what we have learned, I think, about how research makes a difference in this context is the way in which it countered cultures of low expectation. Same time, some forces are pushing in the direction of supporting enhanced college access. They're always the dialectic. There are always forces pushing back in the opposite direction. Partly for that reason, the idea that there is something somewhere out there that we can call a policy of college for all. The language leaves me a little uncomfortable. It seems simplistic. It doesn't kind of capture. If I say that there's a policy of school integration in this country, there's a sense in which that's true, that is the national policy. But the moment I say that, you realize the actual living reality is a whole lot more complicated than just saying that is pronounced policy. And so, and Nicole has already taken us through some of this, right? But according to the Pell Institute, students from the two lowest quartiles of the income distribution accounted for a smaller percentage of BA degrees in 2014 than in 1970, 23% against 28%. I have no doubt that one part of that is the degradation of the Pell grants, right? That is to say, in 1980, Pell Grant covered fully 3/4 of the cost of attending the average four-year public college. Today, a Pell Grant covers 30% of the cost of attending the average public college. So this is, at the same time people are saying, everybody should go to college, people are also saying, who's going to pay for that? Because it's not going to be the public, right? So this undermining of public institutions is happening in a context in which some people are saying. And to the point about college, the number of college counselors available for the average American student can be put into into the same category. So progress has clearly been made. Professor Rosenbaum's figures are quite convincing on that in some respects, but I would be more comfortable characterizing the present scene as one in which there are significant forces pushing both for and against the idea of expanded college access. And one other part of that discussion is that there's a logical precursor to the idea of college for all, and that's the assumption that all students can do college, right? Even the assumption that schools can make a difference in changing the life trajectory of poor children. Now, in Chicago, for the last blank couple of decades, people don't even think about that anymore. The Chicago practice research community does believe schools matter. When you go past that lake y'all got out there, right? There are still people going around. I have a new article that Doug Downey just published last week. I can cite you several articles by David Berliner. Darnell Leatherwood has a bibliography he has just done on that. There are still people who begin with the idea that Coleman proved years ago that schools do not matter in the face of poverty, that poverty overwhelms anything that schools can do. And so all I'm trying to say is that the growing interest in schools for more, college for more people, happens in a context of disinvestment in the tools that would make that actually possible, and in the context of continuing skepticism about what poor children are capable of. I am going to close by just saying that there are some background, I'm really truly closing. I promise you I will close. There's a pattern in the paper of one might almost call them throwaway comments, but kind of background comments that don't seem to be fully fleshed out, and some of them are points that could be problematic. So when one says that remedial programs really work, boy, I need context to sort of think about that, right? Seems to me remedial programs are seldom thought through and seldom reasonably funded. So that's a complicated idea. And when we say that we usually blame students for their failures, well, darn, that just felt dated to me, right? There's a time at which I wrote about people who blame students for their failures, but right now the conservative position seems to be failure as a result of these damn teachers union, and the progressive position seems to be failure as a result of the lack of resources, right? So there are some of those kind of comments that it would have been helpful for me if they'd been pushed. Lastly, though, I just want to really emphasize the clinical part, have so many social workers and educators, and the what to do part. That discussion at the end, I'm going to say of how easy it would be for community colleges to do better if they got more resources and used them well, right? That discussion of how the possibility that we can get large payoffs from relatively small investments if those investments are made wisely. I just want to underscore that that's really important. And stress, which I think is in some ways the theme of Professor Rosenbaum's paper, that the fact that community colleges aren't sexy, right, in the academy, right, that you don't make your career by being a real expert on community colleges, makes it difficult to understand the full potential that they have, which is, again, part of his basic point, I think. So thank you.
So I want to thank Nicole, Alan, and Charles for your very thoughtful comments, and I'd now like to invite Jim Rosenbaum up to join us for a brief discussion among the panel before we turn it over to audience Q&A. So Jim, there's a lot there to respond to, a lot for all of us to think about. I'll leave it to you to think about what you want to focus in your response, but I just want to start with one question for you. I was really struck by Charles' last comment about how this notion that maybe we shouldn't be seeking a BA degree for everyone happens to come at a time of declining resources for higher education. And I'm really struck by this because I just got back from a trip to Israel in which our colleague Mashiri Keels, who is I think not here this evening, presented some of her research on the struggles that first-generation students encounter when they're trying to get a BA, and how often they drop out and they encounter the role that financial difficulties plays in that dropout experience. And I think our Israeli audience was just kind of flabbergasted at this whole concept, because bachelor's degrees pay for by the government there. And so the idea that you wouldn't be able to complete your 4-year degree because you had student loans was just not in the universe of possibility for them. And so, I'd love to hear your response to this, Charles's comment about whether there is any relationship between the timing of an agenda, or how to think about the timing of pushing an agenda that discourages everyone from only focusing on the bachelor's degree at a time when resources for higher education are decreasing.
And costs are increasing.
Yes.
And it's that joint set of trends which makes this all the more poignant, and it makes Charles said it right. It means that we then have to start thinking about, okay, are there ways we can make repairs that are not going to cost as much? Nicole did a wonderful inventory about the costs and the payoffs, and Charles takes off from that and says, we have real constraints here, but we can take steps. And the steps are the ones that I outlined some, and I was really impressed that Alan had a number of different real steps that could be taken. And those are the things that we can take within the constraints of the American system. The American system has some big problems. It has problems of financing, which are really serious. And we really do have to think about alternatives. It also has problems of poor articulation, that the pieces don't fit together very well. The high schools don't prepare for college, and the two-year colleges don't prepare for 4-year college. The 4-year colleges, we even created an articulation agreement where 4-year colleges promise to accept community college credits, but not in particular majors. So it's an incomplete recognition even there. We are so committed to our decentralized, piecemeal, non-system that it creates problems at every turn. And so we have to think in system-like ways that Alan talked about, that Charles talked about, that Nicole talked about. We need to think about the whole system, and how do we create a way of really articulating across these 3 different levels to make them work and to make them affordable. I think CPS has done a magnificent job with very little extra money to think through what are possible plans to make things work. I had the privilege of studying the post-secondary coach program at CPS in its early years when Greg Darnider was just inventing it. And Greg had this great background in community organizing. And Greg's solution was you take community organizers and you bring them inside the school. And you get them to organize college application, college thinking, college choice. And it was just brilliant. And students who had never really been engaged with thinking about anything about their own future, they were asking questions about what could they do for themselves. And the program worked enormously well at really low cost. And in fact, we presented the cost-benefit analysis of it, and Rod Huberman was CEO at the time, was very impressed. And based on our study and further advice that he got from Melissa Roderick, he went ahead with it and expanded the program that he thought he was going to be cutting. So there are steps that can be taken. Research has a really important role in showing those steps and showing how they can be done. And we really need more research in this area to uncover those solutions. It's just really indispensable for making good policy.
So a question I think I'd love to hear our discuss and speak to more is this question of how to avoid the pitfalls of potentially reproducing social inequality, or reinventing tracking, kind of say reinstituting a tracking system. I think several of you have raised concerns about what the risks of this agenda might be for first-generation students, low-income students, others from marginalized groups or disadvantaged backgrounds. The risk that abandoning the College for All, the BA for All agenda in its current form might cool out students' aspirations in ways that exacerbate or reproduce current social inequalities. So I think most of those concerns have been laid out on the tables, but to the extent that Jim Rosenbaum's proposal has merit and that we really do want to think about these other options for students maybe in a stepwise fashion so that choosing one, going through one door doesn't close another one. How would you implement the things that he's talking about in a manner that does not have these harmful unintended consequences?
Good professor, let me answer with a question. Can we have so much expertise on the? Yeah. Would you guys who are really deeply steeped in this, would you say that the reality is that we are moving toward a society in which, in terms of skills, not credentials, but skills, right? The kinds of skills that we now associate with college graduates are actually going to be needed in many of the things that we consider technical careers. Is that a fair surmise? Okay.
And one of the things that gets me most jazzed that's happening in CPS right now is this competency-based pilot where we're actually going to be able to move students when they demonstrate mastery, not when they've sat in a class for a number of hours, right? And that could take so many different forms where students are earning math credit when they are at Chicago Builds building something, right? And so there is that kind of cross-pollination that we have not expected students to apply their learning in this way. We've expected them to do it on a test. And if we actually get students to apply their learning, I think this just opens up so many different options for them.
Right. And I would have to agree with that. I think that in too many schools, we're doing this antiquated, this is the way we've taught in the past.
Yeah.
And those aren't the students that we're teaching today, right? And those aren't the skills that they need. And so we have to really start moving to the application. I think going back to Jim's point about when kids get jazzed, when people get involved, when their hands are on things, students who may not look like they have college potential, all of a sudden, they just light up because their hands are on, they see what's gonna happen, and all of a sudden they want to do it, not because someone spoke to them on hours on end. So I think you're absolutely right, Alan, that there's this movement, but it's not happening fast enough, and it's not happening at scale where I feel a lot of the students who need to be hands-on and feeling that and loving that educational process are able to do that. And to realize that that's useful information. It's not just tinkering around with something.
Right. That is a huge shift, though, for training.
No, I agree.
For teachers and everybody. I mean, this is...
That's fair, too. And I will say this, just to follow up on that comment. I work in a college of education, and I teach teachers. And one of the things I have to say is we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? In other words, we have to change our practice, so we might have to be going back to school to learn how to tinker, right? Because we're used to sitting down and reading from something or doing a particular thing, but that's not what our students need anymore. They need to be they need to be using computers, they need to be in the field. And so I think that this is also retraining of us as educators and practitioners, as well as helping our students. To help our students better, we have to be trained better, or we have to go back through a process.
So, go ahead.
The skills are broader than the ones that we teach academically, though. They also include what we usually think of as professional skills, but skills of taking responsibility, of communication, of working with people that are different than they are, of explaining what's going on, explaining what procedures are going to be done in health or in computer networks. These are new skill demands, and so it requires whole new ways of teaching.
Teaching and measuring.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
One of the things that I had to cut from my talk for time would have been a reference to Jim Heckman's recent work, in which, as I understand, one of his core arguments is that what he calls character skills are more important in determining life outcomes than the kind of academics that we so narrowly focus on. And I've just been surprised that once he laid that argument out there, I think it's been about 2 years now, right? Almost nobody has taken up the cudgel, right? That discussion has not advanced. It's like there's a paradigm and we can't think beyond the old paradigm even when it's been challenged. But the reason I raised the issue about equivalence of skills across sectors, if that's the direction we're going in, is because I have no, what frightens me is the young woman who becomes a hairstylist because someone told her that's all you can do, right?
Yep.
As opposed to a young woman who has a range of skills and can make a choice, and this is what I choose to do, right?
Right.
And so long as we think of, and I obviously I understand exactly what you're saying about how hard it is to make that shift in our teaching, but that would be the situation in which I'm less afraid of racialized tracking growing out of diversification of
Or if that young woman had the background in business practices or accounting or whatever else that would allow her to start her own business, own the hair salon and not
Exactly.
just.
And that's the work that I actually am doing right now. I'm working on a project wherein we are asking students, my colleague and I, Raquel Farmer-Hinton, we're looking at a project wherein we are learning with, from, and about students who are from underrepresented college-going populations and asking them how they're making choices about post-secondary life. And this example, this very example actually came up. We had a student who said, I do hair in the neighborhood. I style people's hair in the neighborhood, and that's what I do. And everybody says I'm really great, so that's what I'm gonna go to school for. And so my colleague and I looked at her and we said, that's great, you have this talent. What's your business sense like? She said, huh? I said, well, how are you gonna manage all the money? Because you're so great at it. I mean, clearly there's gonna be a lot of money coming in. And so our job was to elevate the conversation. Now, when people ask me, should everybody go to college, a four-year college, my answer, and I have to be honest, my heart says yes. I want people to do that. I think that's a great experience. But my head says, what do you think you can do well? What is your skill set? What can you do? But a lot of times, people around students kind of say, oh, that's what you do? Okay, great, and then we move on to the next one, right? Because that's already been asked and answered. We have to elevate that. So my colleague and I have been saying, okay, you want to have this cosmetology thing going on, that's great. How will you have a business? Tell us what the business plan looks like. Now they're thinking a little differently. And I think that's where we have to start introducing those conversations. I agree with Charles's statement about we want them to be able to critique better. Right? I'm not saying everybody has to do it. I'm saying you're making a choice. It's not being chosen for you. That's my fear. That's my big fear.
So I want to give a chance for our audience who's been sitting so politely all this time. I'm sure you have questions. We're going to have a brief Q&A, and then we'll continue the conversation over drinks and food. Wang Lei.
Well, I think
Oh, yes. We're being recorded, by the way, so we have one
there's
microphone.
a lot of discussion about educational systems and demographic groups that go through these systems. Not much has been said about, adolescents, their needs. I think Alan pointed out, what we have seen is they have all these individual needs with, family life, community life they are experiencing. So I think there's a mismatch between the ways high schools are organized and adolescent developmental stage, and we have to revisit the functions, the fundamental functions of education. For elementary school students, we talk about, in addition to cultivating skills, knowledge, teachers, especially their homeroom teachers and principals, they are caregivers as well. See, there's an assumption that high school students should take care of their own business, and if they don't, they get punished. And so it's true with college students, especially first-generation students. Can they take care of their own business, successfully? And I'm glad that there's college and career awareness programs. A lot of efforts are made, but it's far from adequate given the counselor-student ratio. It's impossible. So I know in some schools in this country and in many school systems in other countries, high school students are taken care of just like they were elementary school students. They're the homeroom teacher or they're the teacher. Regardless of what you teach, you are in charge of these students. You watch for their issues and you act as their advocates for them and you mentor them, in maybe it's not an academic subject, but you cultivate their characters. You care about their career plans. So we don't have this at all in the high school system in this country. And you might say, the teachers' union is going against it. No, probably they won't. If they are paid, if they are given the responsibility, they will commit to it. We have to rebuild the system, really taking care of the needs of our adolescents when they make the transition to adulthood. Going back to the fundamentals. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comment.
I totally agree with that, and it's really central to the issues that we've been talking about today. Steve Hamilton, when he went and observed the German apprenticeship, he said, I saw 18-year-olds taking responsibility that Americans think 18-year-olds can't handle. And it's a question of what do we allow adolescents to handle? What environment do we give them? What experiences do we give them? Gutman College that I spoke about, the very first semester, they do not choose their major. They get a variety of work experiences where they learn about careers, and then they go visit careers. They get exposure to things, and then they begin making choices. And by the time they're asked to make a choice of major, they actually know something about what they're choosing, and they're able to make those choices. We need to be able to give those experiences that will inform students' choices.
I would say that much more is being done, though, in the high school space now. I mean, the Office of Social and Emotional Learning is in my shop. We just had the Castle Conference here in Chicago, which is the consortium of, it's another acronym. Just in case.
But that's a good one.
Yeah,
That's a good
better,
one.
it's a better one. Yeah,
Not so bad.
it's a real word.
Castle.
It's districts around the country that are focused on social and emotional learning, relational trust, some of the disproportionality of suspensions and expulsions, restorative practices. I mean, trying to get students to learn from what happens and not just say, you did it, you're punished, you're out of school, we're going to take you away, because that doesn't do anybody any good. So I think we are moving there. I don't think we have gotten there. But I mean, even the relational trust work we're doing among adults in buildings now is important, because frankly, sometimes that can be ugly. And our teachers union is very supportive of this.
And I would add, too, that this entire idea that you have to enhance the quality of freshman year, the idea of protected freshman academies, I think all of that fits into, and the argument, or at least the issue being raised in some other cities around the country that have been following the recently announced success of Chicago, and the possibility that it's because Chicago's a K-8 system, and kids don't have to they remain in a more caring environment longer. They don't have to face that first rough transition until a little bit later. So there are things in place, some of them, again, growing out of the research, and there are discussions going on that reflect some of those.
Derek, do you have a question?
So I was struck by Charles's comment about we're not used to research on community college being sexy. From my perspective as an economist, this is bringing sexy back, because I spent the early 90s here going to talks by Tom Kane and C.C. Rouse, and they established a long time ago that in the NLS 72 and in the NLSY 79, which is my cohort, that there have always been significant economic returns to community college. And in fact, they found that you didn't even have to get the credential. That if you were taking classes in the right degree programs, there was money on the table for every credit you earned. Now, if you failed and never passed a class, there was no return for that. But I think this has been true for decades in the economics of education research, that there are positive gains to be made from people going this route, even if they never do the four-year college. So I think it's a well-established thing. What I would say is that there's a danger when we focus on the cost the wrong way. If Charles is advocating we want more generous funding and more generous scholarship programs and more generous loan programs, I'm all in favor of it. If he's advocating these ideas that we shrink tuition at the state level or make college free for all, that's a bad idea, because I think the recent evidence from David Deming and Chris Walters and others is that when you do that, because it costs money to teach real classes, you end up with the good classes not being staffed and people taking forever to graduate, and they drop out, and it actually doesn't help anyone to say we're going to lower state tuition by $2,000 a student and then not make up that somewhere in the university's budget, because they can't teach the classes in a way that's going to produce skills if you don't give them the money. And so people sometimes confuse the two issues. I'm all for loan programs, Pell Grant scholarships. I'm not for reducing per student spending in state colleges. So just wanted to.
Thank you.
And CPS's STAR program embodies that philosophy.
There's a question in the back. Yeah. From a student.
I have two questions. So first, my question is, when you showed the procedures and policies that you're proposing would make community college students be able to succeed better, it strikes me that a lot of those are also what exactly needs to help students succeed at four-year colleges better, and especially the ones that low-income first-gen students go to. So my question for you is, in terms of scale, like, why are we not pushing that as much as we're pushing community college improvement? And my second question, which I think is really connected, is to be at scale for any of these programs. It seems there's an underlying belief that young adults from low-income communities can learn. But we've had a lot of research that tries to prove that they actually can't, and it's not worth spending money on. So I think a question I have is, how do we, like Gutman is recruited faculty, taught people, trained people, CUNY has done the same for ASAP. They've had to take that on as a prerequisite. It's not been just these like subtle policy changes. So I guess my question is also, do we believe that enough people in this country think 18 to 29-year-olds are malleable, can learn?
I think we don't know the full answers. Those are really good questions. But we do now have some ideas about things we should be trying. The things I described as new procedures, as procedures that are not now being done very widely, but could be done, are ones that might very well reach students who are otherwise not going to show ability. And so to know where ability is, you have to make sure you provide an environment that permits it to come out. And I think some of those procedures would be good ones to use. And Gutman College is doing some of those, and I think it's shown some successes.
Yep, please.
Hi. So Professor Payne, you had mentioned that in the absence of intentional counter procedures, progressive pathways and new options could be translated into policies that are harmful, right? And I just want to out myself. I'm not an academic. I'm a practitioner in the field, and I work for a college access and success organization that is grappling with that right now and trying to figure out how do we balance that tension between valuing a BA and having high expectations that truly excavate the brilliance of our students in CPS, with honoring their personal vision for success, whatever that path might be. So I'm just wondering, as researchers out there, having seen some of those policies, what concretely those might be in practice that are really rigorous counterbalances to make sure we can walk that line of tension appropriately and not do harm.
Let me respond to the first part, because I did not respond to Bridget's questions, because her questions always scare me. Can 18 to 24-year-olds learn? No, I think, again, I want to hear from all the wisdom in this room. I think the answer is emphatically yes. We have to specify the conditions which optimize that. Right. But the work from the MDRC on New York City's small high schools would be one kind of rigorous demonstration of the possibilities, and I'm sure my colleagues will come up with others. Another way to spin that question, can adults learn, right, is can adult educators learn, right? And then that begins to come into your second question about deliberate responses to the tendency to dilute programs for poor black and brown children, to be specific. I would say that, again, while I cannot point to to the same kind of rigorous and precise research, I think that the national experience, say, in some of those school systems which have made the most change. I'm thinking of, say, Montgomery County, where they have adopted a policy of really clear, high expectations and instruction for everybody, really close monitoring of teacher behavior until they believe. You assume that they will not believe it, right? Until they have had extensive experience seeing those kids do well. Assume they will not believe that, right? So that's one example, but I'm sure other folks are going to come up with others.
No excuses charters in big cities have a long record of doing things that people believed 20 years ago when I started going to these workshops couldn't be done. And it's not just one city and it's not just one network. But going on Saturday and doing extra work until you get it works.
We have a comment, question over here?
Yeah.
I think it kind of actually feeds into that in a certain way, but I've heard commentary about the importance of critical thinking, the importance of education for participation in a democratic society, and I guess I'd like to name that the humanities.
Right.
And also say that if things are not put in place intentionally to provide pathways into the humanities, particularly for poor and low-income children and children of color, then the humanities becomes the realm that's only available to the elite. And I think that's a problem for our democratic society moving forward as well. And I think that's often what happens, whether it's in no excuses charter schools or other environments where, sort of testing is at the forefront. There's, harsh discipline policies, et cetera, that have been documented by research. So I would just like to bring the humanities into the room as something valuable in all of these contexts, in addition to social, emotional, and these other areas.
Thank you. Sarah, did you have a comment?
Thank you. Going off of that comment, Professor Rosenbaum, you mentioned this idea of taking an incremental approach, having students start potentially with earning an occupational credential or an associate's degree, and then potentially going on to a four-year degree as well. Yet many of these sub-BA options provide a very narrow set of skills, thinking of, for example, health technologies. And so how do we, like Dr. Rosen asked, ensure that opening one door doesn't close another? How do we better articulate between these levels of degrees in an aligned way?
Good. It's a great question because we don't have good models to look at here, and so my answers are going to be speculative. One of the issues is, why do we have to start with general education in our first year of college? That is a convention. We think it works because we all experienced it, but why not the other way around? Why not start with a practical skill and the social skill, the social skills that go along with it, and the work habits and the problem solving? There's real thought processes that are involved in computer network training, and it also turns out to be an employable skill. Why don't we start with that as a first year and then go on to general education? I don't see anything that's ingrained in stone or in our psychological theories, actually, that says we have to do things the way we are. But the way we do things now is really risky. And it's especially risky for low-income students. And the thing that we haven't talked about here, and we need to talk about, is time. Time is costly for everyone, but it is especially costly for low-income students. They are living on borrowed time. They need to get payoffs quickly. If they get those payoffs quickly, they're more likely to be able to keep continuing. And we don't do that. Instead, we give them a 6-year BA. That's a crime. And so I think we could turn this around, make sure that everybody gets, if they want it, a 1-year certificate, and then they can go on for an associate, and then they can go on for a bachelor's degree. That may take a little longer, I'm not sure, but it would at least make sure that they got something along the way, and it'll give them confidence that they can actually succeed in college and get payoffs.
Interesting. Steve, did you have a question? Okay, last question, and then we're going to eat and drink and continue the conversation at the reception. Anyone? No? Okay, well
I
then,
am.
well then,